Hi, I'm going to go over how to use this camera and how I use it to take pictures at Sitka. So to start off, just with the components of the camera, we have the camera body and the camera lens. You can take the lens off by pressing in this button, rotating it, comes off, and then you can put it back on. You want to always keep a lens on the camera and keep the lens and the camera body covered. You don't want dust to get inside the lens or into the sensor of the camera. On the bottom of the camera, we have this hatch where I can take out the battery and change the SD card. There's also this, which is a viewfinder, so I can press this button on the side and there's a screen I can look through here instead of the big one here. But this isn't really necessary. If the camera didn't come with it, that's all good. So I can take the lens cap off, and now I can take pictures. There's also this button here, which will open up the flash if you need it. I don't think I ever needed to use the flash at Sitka. With a camera like this, as opposed to a phone camera, you get a lot more control over certain settings. The three most important ones to know about are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So I'll go through what those three are. The aperture is how wide open the little opening in the lens is when you take a picture. So I'm going to turn this around, put this up to a camera, and take a picture, and you may be able to see the aperture close and open. So that little opening is adjusted with the aperture. So you can open it very wide to let in a lot of light, or close it down to let in less light. This lens has a maximum aperture of 1.7. This is the lower number means a wider open aperture, and 1.7 is pretty low for a lens, and so this is super useful in the studios because there's not a lot of light indoors, so you want it to be able to open really wide to let in as much light as possible. So the next setting is the shutter speed, and this is how long that aperture is open for when you take a picture. Now the shutter speed can be anywhere from several seconds all the way down to this 2 means half a second, the 4 is a quarter, all the way to 1/4000th of a second. Now, the longer the shutter is open for, or the slower the shutter speed, the more light it's going to let in. However, if your shutter is open for 1 full second, then it's going to capture all of the movement that your camera does and all of the movement that's happening in the image over the course of that 1 full second. And so that really adds up to a lot of blurriness. The longest shutter speed that you can usually get away with is about 1/60th of a second. And if you want to be safe with it, then around 100 to 200 is even better. And that's usually about what I'm shooting at when I'm inside the studios at Sitka. When I go outside and there's bright sunlight, it could be 1/2000th or more. And the final setting is the ISO, which I can adjust with this button here. And this determines how sensitive the sensor inside the camera is to the light that's coming in. So if I increase this, it makes the sensor more sensitive to light. So the same amount of light and the same shutter speed and aperture, I can make a brighter photo if I increase the ISO. However, if I increase it too far, I end up with an image that is very noisy or grainy, and it's just really not that usable. It's these three settings that you want to really understand to know how this camera is working and how to take good, consistent pictures with it. Like on a phone camera, it's making all of the choices for you. And this camera can do that as well. If you set it to the intelligent mode here, it's just gonna do everything for you. And it'll do a pretty good job of it most of the time, but it might not always get it quite right. And it helps to have some control over certain things to keep things consistent and to prevent the camera from making mistakes. So how I shoot is I put it in this mode, P, priority, where the camera is choosing the proper shutter speed and aperture, and I get to choose the ISO and some of the other settings. So in program mode, I'll set the ISO depending on how bright it is. If it's a cloudy day, maybe 200 to 400. If it's a bright sunny day, maybe 100 to 200. So I can just change this based on the light. And then the camera is going to take care of the shutter speed and the aperture for me. And it's showing me what those are with these two numbers down here, aperture and shutter speed. So it's at 1.7 and 320. So that's good. That's great. I can take a nice crisp picture with that. If I feel like the exposure isn't quite right, and I can tell that using this histogram right here, having these bars more to the left means it's pretty dark, whereas having the bars more to the right means it's brighter. So I can press in this dial here to turn this yellow, and then I can rotate it to bump up the exposure or down to make a brighter or darker image. So I'll bump this up a little bit. And now the aperture is 1.7, the shutter speed has gone down to 125, so it has more time to let more light in. 125 is still good. And so I can take a picture like that. And this is a nice brighter photo. We can compare the two I just took. Brighter, darker, and there we go. I also have these guidelines on the screen that help me keep the camera horizontal and prevent me from taking pictures at an angle. Because this is super important, and it's something that you want to get right when you're taking the pictures. You don't want to have to fix this when you're editing them. And so those settings, both the guideline and the histogram, I turned on in the settings here, in this menu. And so you can go through all of these settings menus to get those things. The other good thing to know is the focus, autofocus and manual focus. There are two modes. I always keep it on autofocus. The camera gets it right 99% of the time. And it would be just too much work to manually set the focus every time you're going to take a picture. There's also the white balance, which determines the color, but I just use the automatic white balance. The camera gets it right most of the time, and I can fix it when I'm editing if the camera gets it wrong. And then there's this button up here, which lets you go and look back through the photos you took. And you can delete things if you need. You can zoom in on them using this wheel here. But mostly I just take the pictures and don't even look at them until I upload them to my computer to edit. And so that's what we'll cover next.